Welcome to the second of the Pinstripe Bible boardroom sessions. I'm Stephen Goldman, and with me are my Bible study group, Cliff Corcoran and Jay Jaffe. Let's get right to the baseball this time. Jay, the Yankees are 4-6 in their last 10. They are 12-8 in their last 20, which is obviously a little better, but there's been a bit of a bump lately. Some people want to be a bit panicky about that at this point. Do you think that's justified?
No, I think the Yankees have a bit of a lead in the AL East, and they've got a comfortable lead in terms of with the Red Sox 6 games back, and they split the series, so the Red Sox didn't gain any ground on them. The thing I'm starting to worry about is the starting pitching, because between A.J. Burnett and Javi Vasquez and the shakiness that Phil Hughes has shown really over the last 2 months, they're starting to see some cracks. And at the time when the Yankees almost traded for Cliff Lee, you could argue that the relief corps and the bench were maybe more glaring weaknesses. Right now, that rotation is starting to show a bit of wear, and they need some consistency from somebody besides CC Sabathia.
Do you agree, Cliff?
Well, they're definitely going to need Andy Pettitte to come back. I mean, he's not due back until the end of August at the earliest. I think he's got a rehab start. They'll come in the 20s there somewhere, and if it doesn't go well, he's going to need another one. It could be September before we see him again. So that's kind of a big hole. I mean, Mosley's pitched well, but he's not really a good pitcher. So there are concerns, and Burnett has kind of been the guy I thought he would be when they first signed him, as opposed to the somewhat more reliable pitcher he was last year. There are concerns there, but I mean, the bullpen seems to have worked itself out to a certain degree, but I don't really trust that. I don't really trust Boone Logan in key matchup situations. I don't really know how much I'm going to trust Jabba Chamberlain in big situations, or even David Robertson, who I like. But I mean, those performances fluctuate a lot, and these pitchers are not ones with track records that are long or that make me feel terribly confident about their situation late in games. I do agree, however, with Jay that the Yankees don't really have that much to worry about, given the lead in the relative to the wild card, the second place wild card team, the Red Sox.
How far can the Rangers go, Cliff? Given that they have, I mean, Cliff Lee obviously is an established veteran presence, and he's pitched really well in the postseason. We know that, but their rotation really has surprises like Colby Lewis and
Right.
C.J. Wilson, Tommy Hunter. They've been really surprising.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Well, the Rangers, they're one of those teams that are always going to hit, and they've got a lot of really good hitters doing really good things, although, Josh Hamilton's injury situation is always a concern, and Kinsler being out, and they have, Nelson Cruz seems to always be hurt as well, although he's doing well right now. So the Rangers are one of these teams that they almost feel like an all-or-nothing team. The pitchers that you mentioned, Wilson and Lewis, have been big surprises, one guy being a converted reliever, the other one having spent 2 years in Japan, where he did pitch very well, but an American in Japan, that's a warning sign to start with. So there are a lot of concerns with the Rangers, but obviously the Cliff Lee trade was huge. They patched some big holes in their lineup by adding Benji Molina, and even though he's not a very good player, Jorge Cantu, the Rangers' first basemen, were essentially the worst position players in the American League as a group, and they patched that with not a great player, but any sort of improvement is good there. So the Rangers are a dangerous team.
This is backtracking a bit because obviously we're just getting to do this now, and we didn't have these boardroom sessions going during the trading deadline. But did the moves that the Yankees made around the trading deadline to get Lance Berkman and Austin Kearns, did they solve the problems that the Yankees had?
I think they did. They strengthened the bench, unequivocally. There's no question about that. But I was at the ball game yesterday with the Red Sox, the Monday game with Phil Hughes, and that really exposed the problem that they have at the bottom of the lineup with Curtis Granderson not being able to hit lefties, and the fact that they don't really have a good platoon fit to back up Granderson against lefties, and that's something that Austin Kearns is a better hitter against lefties than Granderson is, but he's not that much better. Brett Gardner has a better on-base percentage against lefties, but still, he's been having a dreadful slump over the last month or so. It would have been nice if they could have gotten a piece that fit just a little bit better to go with Granderson.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Austin Kearns, regardless of his splits. I mean, Austin Kearns basically had a hot month or month and a half for the Indians at the beginning of this year, and he was on that team as a non-roster player. He was terrible for the Nationals for the last 2 seasons, in a big disappointment before that. But the last 2 seasons, and plus he's had all sorts of arm and wrist injuries.
Well, those are linked. I mean, the shoulder
Absolutely.
shoulder problems
That's what
are
I'm
linked.
saying. It's so there's a reason that he's been bad,
Right.
and that's even more problematic. If there's a reason that he's been bad, then and so he had a hot couple months maybe for the Indians, but I don't think that that's something that's going to carry over into his Yankee career. I'm not sure Austin Kearns is much of anything. I mean, I'm not even sure Austin Kearns is going to support his place on a postseason roster. If he doesn't kind of
In his favor, it would be a nice story, though, if he was able to contribute something, just because his career has been a little unusual in that he was a top prospect for the Reds, came up and hit, I believe, 1999 or 2000 at this point. Maybe I'm a little too early, but he came up and hit really well for a year and a half, something like that, and then just fell off.
Well, those were all
he got lost in a shuffle in that outfield. There were the Reds had a lot of guys there. William O'Pena was one of them. I'm blanking on who the other Adam Dunn was another one, obviously, and then Griffey taking up space. And
4 men for 3 positions.
Yeah, they really had to find a spot for him. And as Cliff said, he's had some shoulder problems, but I do think he's got, at least what he does have going for him now is he's got some plate discipline. He doesn't have as much pop as he used to. I think he can be a useful 4th outfielder.
I want to talk about Brett Gardner for a second, since you guys brought him up. As you said, Jay, Gardner has been in this miserable slump for about a month now, and a little over a month actually. And it seems to me that if you look at the game-by-game record, that it corresponds exactly to the June 27th, I believe it was, wrist injury that he had. So I wonder if he's playing hurt, and if that's a bigger part of what's going on right now. And given that, I mean, what if he doesn't snap back?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And actually, I kind of glossed over that mentally when I thought about Brett Gardner, but it does link up pretty well, and we know that hand injuries can really have an effect on a guy's production, and maybe the Yanks just need to kind of ease off him a little bit and suck it up with Gardner. I mean, Granderson just a bit more. I mean, Gardner is a very important part of what they need to do in October, because he gets on base, he can steal bases, he can disrupt the pitcher. If they need to give him time to heal, that's what has to be done.
And it's something that actually Andy Pettitte said recently about his rehab situation, that he's not, the important thing is not one extra win in August. It's being ready and fully healthy for the postseason, because as we just said, the Yankees seem pretty well headed in that direction. Right. So yeah, getting Brett Gardner healthy, and I do think it reminds you a lot of when Derek Jeter was hit in the wrist last year or the year before, and went into a big slump. It's a very similar situation, and Gardner has shown some trouble staying healthy, which is one concern about him early on, particularly jamming his thumb last year on the base, and that's sort of a lot of hand injuries. But yeah, it's getting Gardner healthy might be more of a concern than getting the proper on-paper matchups for the next couple weeks.
Let's talk real fast too about their other acquisition, Lance Berkman. He's been off to a slow start, has hit into some ill-timed double plays. Charlie Brown, Alex Rodriguez with a line drive during batting practice. I think a lot of people want to bury the guy already, but what are your expectations, Cliff?
Well, Lance Berkman used to be one of the best hitters in baseball, and he's kind of suffering that early decline that you see in players of his body type and his dimensions. As a first baseman, as a bit of he's got that kind of David Ortiz, Travis Hafner. He's not as much because he used to play the outfield. He's a bit more athletic than those guys, but he's 34, and he's not the hitter he used to be. But as I'll take a diminished Lance Berkman on the bench over a lot of other players, including Austin Kearns, I like the acquisition a lot. I think that he's going to run into a hot streak at one point or another, and just to have a professional hitter, he's still, like Jay said, relative to Kearns, on base percentage, he's still going to get on base. He may be pushing a little bit now and maybe swinging at some pitches he shouldn't be, but Lance Berkman is going to be an asset to this team.
Jay, do you agree?
Well, if you look at Berkman's year-by-year splits, he's really struggled against lefties the last couple of years. He's batting below 200 this year, and that's I guess a bit of a warning sign. I mean, he's actually moved, on the base paths at least, moved a little bit more nimbly than I would have expected. He certainly didn't make a strong first impression, in terms of his glove work when he subbed for Teixeira over the weekend. But I think he'll be coming around on that. The Yankees don't need him to back up first base all that often, but I think they just need to pick his spots a little fairly judiciously.
Well, the interesting thing about his splits though is that last year his reverse was the other way around. He's had a terrible split against lefties this year, but last year he didn't.
No, last year was bad too.
We'll both double check that. I'm pretty sure
I put this in my column at Baseball Prospectus this morning.
Well,
so.
either way, I think platoon stats can be small enough. And
Sure.
the
Well, exactly right.
In a given year, that even if he did have an aberrant year, the overall historical trend still applies, I think, and that is that he struggles against it. And it is really funny, isn't it, that teams from time immemorial, they haven't all had Stuffy McGinnis or Keith Hernandez at first base. They've had some real iron gloves there, and yet whenever the Yankees put a Giambi out there or give Berkman one day to sub for Mark Teixeira, that the bat hops always find them.
And even on that day, he did make a really nice play later in the game. So I mean, you know.
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of an industry-wide obsession with glove men at first base. I call it the JT Snow model. It's just like, seem to be a lot of good glove guys who just can't carry it with the bat enough, and teams seem to think that that's still worth paying for. Casey Kochman in Seattle, another case in point. I mean, that guy gets chance after chance, but he can't hit Major League pitching consistently.
Lou Gehrig was not a good defensive first baseman.
No, he wasn't. He was famously not.
But if you hit like Lou Gehrig, who cares?
Right, exactly. And I think what people miss is that the error, however glaring in one game, doesn't compare to the RBIs over the whole 162
Exactly.
games.
It's just harder to see the larger picture when you're watching an individual play.
It's funny with Berkman, isn't it, that we've been talking about his athleticism or lack thereof, and yet this was a guy who, I guess it was a long time ago now, but used to get squeezed into center field every once in a while by the Astros.
Oh, God, I'd forgotten about that.
I mean, and it wasn't necessarily the best fit in the world, but he could at least sort of fake it for a while.
Well, they've got Swisher and Berkman. They can both play center field, right?
So,
what about Kerry Wood? We haven't talked about Kerry Wood.
We haven't talked about Kerry Wood.
Kind of doing that on purpose.
Well, he's done reasonably well.
Yeah, I think I like the pickup. I think it's a live arm. It's another guy besides Jabba and David Robertson. He's got experience that might rub off on them if nothing else. I mean, he's been through a lot of what those two guys are going through. In his transition to the bullpen, and he has thrown reasonably well. I mean, he's a bit of an adventure out there like they are, but. I do like the pickup because they needed another arm down there.
He's Kyle Farnsworth.
Okay.
He walks a lot of guys, he gives up a lot of home runs, he throws real hard, gets a lot of strikeouts. I can't really trust him. He's Kyle Farnsworth.
So my all-time favorite T-shirt that I saw, I guess 2 years ago, walking into the press gate at Yankee Stadium, was a woman went by me, and her T-shirt said, "Anyone but Farnsworth" on it. So does that mean that
Farnsworth by a different name?
I think
will we be seeing anyone?
I think he's mentally stronger than Farnsworth. Farnsworth just always struck me as a guy who just was the second coming of Nuke LaLoosh, and Wood's a little bit more savvy. I mean, he's also been through a lot more health-wise, and
sure, yeah.
And I think he's had to kind of remake himself as a pitcher a bit, whereas Farnsworth never really remade himself as a pitcher, just chuck and duck.
And I think the end result is the same as what I'm saying, though.
Yeah, you could argue that.
And yet the potential exists, should the Yankees get into the World Series, that they might see a Farnsworth or the Farnsworth in the World Series, given that he got traded to the Braves, where he's setting up for Billy Wagner right now after having a pretty good year for the Royals.
I'm not holding my breath on that one.
And on that note, I think we'll close it out. On behalf of Jay Jaffe, Cliff Corcoran, and myself, thank you for watching. Keep reading Pinstripe Bible and YesNetwork.com.